Today's session is part of the Building Strength from Within During Times of Change resource series. This is our final webinar, but there are more resources available within the article that was released a few weeks ago that pulled together all those resources into one page. So I'm going to go ahead and share that link in the chat so you can take a look at those resources. There's some on-demand webinars, but there's also the moving break to get your body moving and the meditation series that's still continuing into next week. So I hope you'll check it out. You can also revisit that site to see the recordings of these sessions. Once we get those recordings posted, we'll put that in the article as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Carly.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. Hi, everyone. I'm Carly with the EAP. Today we're talking about self-care. Hopefully at the end of this, our time together, you'll be able to maybe walk away with some different perspective on self-care and the role that it plays in your life. So to get started, just a little bit of an agenda here so we kind of have the idea of where we're going. So, we're going to start off by talking about the things that self-care isn't. We're going to really focus on a couple of specific areas where we can incorporate self-care into our lives. And then hopefully as we move through, we'll have some time to start crafting a personalized self-care plan. If we don't have time for that today, the information will be in the PDF that's shared out so that you'll have access to it later. But I have found that when we actually make a commitment to creating something, guideline, notebook, whatever we do, that we tend to stick with it more. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. So self-care, I can almost guarantee anytime I say that phrase, at least one person's going to roll their eyes or another person's going to be like, look, I have taken so many lavender bubble baths that lavender is now just my personal scent forever because it clings to me. And, I get it, especially when COVID was at the height of, oh my gosh, almost 5 years ago now. It seemed like self-care was just this big buzzword where it was meant to be a cure-all for everything. And if you just bought the special candle, took the long bubble bath, everything in your life would fall into place. And, realistically, self-care is meant to help improve our lives, but there is no one magic fix to it. So the eye rolling, the I'm not buying more candles or taking a bubble bath kind of thing. I'm right there with you, which is why I chose to focus on some specific areas in our lives where we might not normally think to apply self care or see the role that self care plays into it. So I will always say, if you enjoy those candles and lavender's your thing, and you love those bubble baths, absolutely continue doing them because anything you can do, just even if it gives you that quick boost in a moment to just help you feel better and centered and ready to handle whatever it is that you're about to walk into, that is fantastic. Never ever give up on those quick things, okay? So, there are two parts of self care that are really important here. So, when we talk about self care actions, these are the things that we are doing in our lives that, can help us look after ourselves and lead a healthier life. But then there are also self-care interventions, and those are evidence-based tools that help really highlight and show us the support that self-care plays in our lives. So for most of us, what we want to do is we want to focus on those actions because intervention is usually coming at a place where things have been too much for too long and we need some additional support. So I'm really hoping that if we just focus on the actions we can do, we find that we don't have to focus so much on the intervention. And let's talk about some myths. These are pretty common myths that we hear. They're still really prevalent, even though the area of self-care is more predominant in wellness and well-being circles where we do talk about it more. There's still a lot of myths that exist within it, such as self-care is selfish. You know, I cannot even tell you how many times I personally believe that. Like, well, taking that 10 minutes to meditate or uh, 15 minutes to read or to take a walk or whatever it is that I need to do to feel better about myself is, you know, XYZ amount of time that's taking away from a work task, supporting other people, to running an errand, to doing, right? But what we find is when we push that off and we carry around that belief that self care is this selfish thing that doesn't benefit anyone else, we're really doing a disservice to ourselves because in actuality, we all know that if we can't breathe, we can't help the people next to us breathe. So we need to change that narrative and look at self-care as a necessary act for ourselves. So it is not selfish, it is completely unselfish because it helps us prepare better to be the person we want to be in the world. And self-care is not always about pampering. I mean, that can absolutely be a part of it because, again, if you've got that thing that makes you feel really good in that moment, that's an act of self-care. But it goes beyond that. It goes into how we're taking care of ourselves, the people that we're associating with, the things that are going on in our lives. It also doesn't have to be expensive and time consuming. Many of us are already engaging in things that are self care without realizing it. For those who think, well, I'll do the meditation when I have that perfect 30-minute block of time where I can sit there and zen. We don't have to do that. You can do a 2-minute meditation before a big meeting. It's an act of self-care. And of course, you don't ever have to spend money to practice self-care. So we want to dispel those myths. And then of course, this is just the way things are framed, which is very unfortunate, is that it does seem like when we talk about self-care, we really do focus on people who identify as women. It's always the special workout outfit, it's the amazing wellness patch or smoothie mix that's going to get us going, or it's always, oh, you're such a busy mom, you need to indulge in this product. But self-care is actually for everyone. And there is actually research that does support that if we start engaging children in self-care at a young age, that as they continue to grow and develop, they actually make self-care a priority. So it is not just for women. It is not just for women of a certain age. It is for anybody. So we really want to dispel that. So if we have a male person with us who's like, I need some self-care, we should be like, yes, absolutely. Let's encourage that. So couple of big myths right there that we really, really want to dispel. And we can start doing that by exploring self care practices, the things that we do to help us. And the reason we engage in self care practices is for so many reasons. It helps us increase our resilience. It helps us have more self-awareness because we know, when we're not engaging in a self-care practice, we know that we're not doing okay. It helps us manage our stress. It helps us be present for other people. It's just, a good thing to practice. So that's why we really focus on a self-care practice. And as I said, I wanted to take it a bit deeper than just take the bubble bath, do a meditation, and really go into actual things that we might already be doing or consider doing, but don't associate with self care. Now, starting with physical self care practices. Physical self care, it is absolutely important for our energy and vitality. And so it's things that we already do. Regular exercise, I'm going to speak more about that in a minute. The way we eat, what we're drinking, having routines in our lives that can really help with us. For example, there on the screen, I wrote bedtime routine, which sounds so silly, but there was a presentation I did for Wellness Wednesday last year where we actually looked into building routines. And a lot of research does show that for adults who establish a bedtime routine, everything from this is when I stop looking at my computer, I stop doing this, I take a moment to wash my face, brush my teeth, and have my nighttime tea, and I'm in bed by this time, and my bed's set up this way, and this is the temperature in my room. When we establish those routines at night, we are actually preparing ourselves better for the next day because sticking to that routine, we've got it and usually helps us get back into our natural sleeping patterns. Our body starts recognizing those cues that it's time to rest and relax. And that is perfect for helping us set up for the next day because we're not doing things like staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning, you know. So we establish those routines and we really see a big benefit in our physical self-care. And we also talk a lot about exercise. Now, um, for me, it's not about, oh, well, I have to get XYZ amount of cardio because I need my heart rate to be at this. What I have found when looking through self-care practice is that when we talk about things like eating and exercise, it can be a bit, there's some negative connotations with it because you say exercise and people are like, well, I can't do this because, or I don't like this because, or eat a balanced meal. Well, I don't have access to, or I don't enjoy this thing. So for me, when we talk about self-care practices regarding physical activity, it means movement. Movement is so beneficial for us. It does actually help us with mental clarity. Of course, it helps us with building immune systems. But again, research also shows that when we're taking time to move in a way that we find relaxing, that we find energizing, that we find of interest, that again, we're building a self-care practice because we're like, I could really use 10 minutes to go outside and walk right now. It's, something in our brain is telling us, I need to take a moment to step away from things and just go breathe and be outside. So we're talking about finding the movement that makes you happy. And if that is not running, that is perfectly fine. If it's dancing in your living room, whatever it is, finding movement that makes you happy is definitely an act of self-care. And with eating, I don't focus on what you should or should not eat because I'm not a dietitian. I'm not anybody's nutritionist. But what I do like to remind people is that in an act of self-care, we can be mindful about eating because when we're being mindful about what we're eating and when we're eating, we are naturally slowing ourselves down. And again, we're creating a routine for ourselves. So we're not engaging in work while we're eating, or we're not looking at the phone or watching TV. We're, focusing on the way our food tastes, how it feels in, our mouth, the things, the happiness that it brings us, the spices that are used. It's allowing us to slow down, which is slowing down is a huge self-care practice. So when we start implementing these smaller, easier to do everyday activities, we do find that, they're self-care practices and they continue to contribute to our ability to manage stress and build resilience. So really start thinking about the physical things you do in your life that are acts of self-care. And if you're looking at this going, I don't do any of that. Now's a good time to start thinking about it, especially when we start talking about building a personalized self-care plan. And remember, self care is about the thing that works for you. So if physical self care isn't something that really interests you right now, perfectly fine. It is unique to the individual. Moving on to emotional self care. Emotional self care really kind of goes hand in hand with the mindfulness, with being present, with practicing the gratitude. But what we're really doing is it's a self care practice in which we are building self awareness. Um, the things like taking time to journal out our feelings. And a lot of people are really amazing at journaling. There's others like me who start off really strong and kind of fall off. Reflective and guided journaling can be really helpful where we have a prompt that we focus on. This was a feeling I experienced today. Here's why I felt this way. Here's what I did to work through it. Because again, when we can uh, practice emotional regulation, it is a form of self-care. So this can also be things like practicing mindfulness. And like I said, it doesn't have to be a super long involved thing. You can do a quick 2-minute mindfulness breathing exercise. I usually default to talking about box breathing just because that's the one that most people are, associated, are familiar with. So for emotional self-care, if we're having a day where it feels like a lot, I know Jessica and I were talking that this Friday it just feels like this has been a very, very long week and already been a very long Friday. And so maybe you have some meetings you got to go into, some documents you have to write, another presentation you have to build, and you're just not feeling it. You can take 2 minutes to do that box breathing and provide yourself some emotional self care. And with box breathing, you literally just breathe into the count of 4, you hold your breath for the count of 4, you release the breath for the count of 4, you hold again for 4, and you just repeat that cycle as often as you need to. And while you're doing that, just focus on the breathing, the inhalations and the exhalations. What you find is that your body starts calming down. A lot of the thoughts that are racing through our heads kind of calm down, and we find that we're more present in that moment. And then when we're ready, we can stop, bring ourselves back to what we're doing, and we find that we usually have mental clarity and we can continue going on with the things that we want to do. Um, Therapy is also very, very important to this because sometimes what we most need in the world for self care is a neutral third party person who is just going to listen to us talk and then offer advice to help us meet whatever it is that we brought to them. EAP is wonderful for this. You get free counseling with a counselor to talk about the things that are on your mind. For some people, therapy is an act of self-care that they will participate in for as long as they possibly can. And then practicing gratitude. Um, this is one that, again, it is so buzzy. Oh, be grateful for everything. But when we talk about gratitude, it's not be grateful because someone has it worse than you kind of thing. It's not the don't ever acknowledge that there are things that get us down or that there are things that are not positive in the world. When we're talking about this gratitude, it's that optimism that comes with it. So the acknowledgement that there are things that go wrong. There are bad things in the world. There's suffering that we all experience. But if we can find one thing in that moment to just be grateful for and express that gratitude, again, it is an impactful practice for emotional self care. So being able to say, in this moment, I'm really angry because, someone criticized my work really, really harshly. But instead of letting it kind of simmer in there and really bring me down, I'm going to choose to show gratitude and express gratefulness because I now have an opportunity to see someone else's perspective and grow from it and see how I can improve what I'm doing. It doesn't take away the fact that, yeah, this is kind of a really low moment, but it gives us that other perspective. It gives us a chance to name gratitude and it can give us an action to move forward with, which is, again, wonderful for emotional regulation. So we really want to think about those emotional self-care practices. I will also say this is one that my therapist and I have actually disagreed on a few times when we talk about emotional self-care practices for people when they hear terms like emotional regulation. What we're actually hearing is you must be in control of every feeling you ever have all the time. And if the situation calls for it, we must stamp it down and never acknowledge it, especially in our workplaces. And that's actually not what it means. It means that we're giving name to the emotion we're feeling and we're looking for a way to express that. So if you're angry in a moment, be angry in a moment. Don't say to yourself, I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't express that I'm upset with this person, place, thing, whatever article I just read. No, acknowledge it. I'm angry in this moment because what that person said about my work was really hard to hear. So be angry about it. Let that feeling simmer and then say, okay, now I'm going to focus on what I can do about it. And so one of the things that I also say for emotional self-care, and this is the part my therapist greatly disagrees with me upon, is sometimes we have to get that emotion out. And so I have a punching bag in my prior workplace. We had one in our break room. So in that moment where the feeling is too big and I have to get this out because I can't focus on anything else, it was really refreshing to be able to go poke that punching bag and just kind of work out whatever that emotion was when we felt we couldn't direct it in any other way. So excuse me, she disagrees with me and says that we should probably not encourage people to hit things if we're feeling angry and need to get a feeling out. But I think being able just to explore our emotions and get them out in a way that works for us is an amazing practice for self care. And sometimes for me, poking that punching bag allows the thought processes to work through, and I come up with ideas for what I can be expressing gratitude for. So finding ways to regulate your emotions and show them in ways that are healthy for you. Now, if you're someone who struggles with this and you're like, I don't even know what that means. There are a ton of great resources out there. And this is really, again, where counseling and having that neutral third party can really help us with our emotional self care. We also don't often talk about social self care practices. It seems like when we talk about self care, it really kind of feels like we're talking about things that we only do for ourselves by ourselves. But there are a couple of things that are really important to know. We are social creatures. We are hardwired this way. Of course, everybody has a different level, for their need for socialization. Some of us can get by with very little. Others absolutely thrive by being surrounded by other people all the time. So it's fine with whatever your social level is. But what we do know is that we cannot exist in a bubble by ourselves. And because we are seeing increasing cases of people expressing and experiencing loneliness, the Surgeon General did release a warning about a loneliness pandemic where we are very, very connected through our technology, but as individuals, as people, as human beings, we are very disconnected from each other. So social self-care is a important integral part of our overall well-being. um, this can be things like spending time with our loved ones, with our friends, catching up with a coworker that you haven't seen for a while, engaging in our community activities. Volunteer work is a wonderful example of social self-care. Connecting with people who share interests the same as yours. I used to go to a lot of poetry and author readings when I was younger because that was my way of social connection. It can be having a phone call with a friend you haven't spoken to in a while. And a big one is it can also be learning what our boundaries are and how to actively enforce them. And that feels kind of weird when it comes to social self-care because we're talking about, oh, being around people, being around, doing things. But it also comes down to knowing when we've had enough and we need a moment for ourselves. So knowing that I can't be the person who handles everyone else's emotional baggage today because I need space for myself, or knowing that I have so many commitments coming up this weekend and I just can't do them all. Being comfortable to set a boundary and say I would love to do this, but this weekend I just need to sit on the couch and read a book or catch up on my favorite TV show or stare out the window. So setting boundaries is also an important act of social self-care. And never underestimate the power of the word no. And yes, I do see that comment. Boundaries are really hard to maintain, especially if you want to be there for everyone or you're used to being there for everyone or everyone looks at you as the person to always go to. It is really hard, which is why we continually have to practice them and find ways to make sure that they're working for us. And again, boundaries, some days you're going to have great days where you're like, nope, this is not happening today. And other days where, you can be talked out of that boundary. But it's important to recognize that setting them and keeping them as often as you can is vitally important. And even if you just start off with one small one, like saying no to that standing get together every Saturday night at 7 p.m. because you would much rather be at home just relaxing, maybe taking that bubble bath we talked about earlier, and being able to practice that boundary and say, I appreciate the offer, but I'm only going to come to one this month instead of every day. So they don't have to be big, huge things right away. We can build and start small. Another area of self-care that we don't often talk about is our need and our purpose in who we are, finding that spiritual connection. Spirituality does not have to be religious, but of course, if you are a religious person, your religious self-care practices are just as important because it allows us to engage in spiritual practices. It allows us connection to our cultural practices. For some of us, this can be, that meditation, time in nature, self-reflection, our connection with people who hold similar beliefs. For some people, that act of self-care is the weekly church service they go to. For others, I know of a group who it's led through a center here in Olympia where they have meetings. I think it's every first Saturday of the month where they go out into the woods, they find a big clearing and they engage in a mindfulness spiritual activity for an hour. So it's finding those things as well because it helps us connect to who we are and it can help remind us of our values, of the things that we hold dear. It can also provide reminders for when things are out of alignment there. So making sure that we're practicing those spiritual and self-care um, practices are also vitally important. And again, it also might allow us for that some of that social connection for self-care as well. So whatever it is that you do, and if you don't have something you would consider spiritual or religious, how about culturally? And when we talk culturally, it doesn't have to be, an overarching community. It can be something that's unique to you and your family, you and your friends, those things that connect us. We find that people who engage in these practices tend to have better stress management and do tend to have higher resilience because they're able to see the things outside of themselves. How about creativity as self care? How many of us have actually ever thought of the things that we do and enjoy to be an act of self care? I know I wouldn't think of something like cooking or baking to be an act of self care. It's just something we do, right? For many of us, we spend our days writing at work, and the thought of writing at home for self care is kind of, but there is, again, a growing body of research about hobbies and creativity as an act of self care. So things like the expressions that we can give through our art, our writing, and our music, cooking and baking, the act of creating something from nothing. For many people, that creativity can reflect in things like acting and dancing, performance, whatever that might be. When we have the time to engage in these types of self-care practices, they usually come pretty naturally. You sit down and you think, "Oh, I'm going to finish writing that story this weekend." My husband is a big, really big into art. And one of the things that I've noticed he does when he tends to get a little stressed out is he has little miniature figures and he just sits there and paints them. It's an act of self-care. It's a hobby that he enjoys doing. It's time where he's focusing on that, maybe not concerned with everything else that's going on. For me, when I have the time, it's reading because you can escape into a book. And what's also really great about our creative self-care practices is these are usually the activities, the hobbies, the whatever we consider them. These are the ones that usually fall off first when we're under stress, when we're not feeling well, when we're going through change, when everything just feels too much. We kind of give up on the things like reading, painting, um, baking for friends, whatever it might be, that creative outlet that most of us do have. We tend to give that up first because it's just easier to look at your guitar in the corner and think, oh, I'll get to that eventually when I'm feeling better. So making sure that if we suddenly notice that, gosh, it's been such a long time since I've painted or knit or sewn, that could be an indication that, we're kind of slacking in self care and need to take a step back and go, okay, I need to start putting myself first again. Because as was just shared in the chat there, it is really amazing how using our brain in a different or creative way can actually be so incredibly re-energizing. I often think of when I can motivate myself to go out on a nice long walk, how something different, I'm not staring at my computer or sitting on the couch. I'm out and engaging in something. I might even talk to a neighbor or at least their dog. Um, you come back and you feel so different. You feel energized. So again, if you normally consider yourself creative, but those paints are gathering dust in the corner, it's time to take that step back and reaffirm and relook and go, okay, I need to make space for myself. And if that means at first you actually have to schedule it onto your calendar, that's fine. Whatever you need to do to remind yourself that this is important in my life and it brings me happiness, you build it up and it becomes a routine. I'm coming back to support systems. I know. It feels like I'm not sure where I wanted to go with that phrase. But one of the things that we have especially found, and I'm relating this a lot to our workplaces, especially as now we are in, oh, everything kind of feels like it's in chaos, right? I know, I work for the state government. We have all new admin. I know that the UW is bringing in a new president. So there's a lot of change in our workplaces, and we tend to ignore that self-care in the workplace because we're there to do a job. We're just trying to make it through. But what we have found is that when we come back to talking about self-care and social support, um, especially in our workplaces, it is so incredibly important to know that we have that support in the workplace, whether that's that coworker who works the desk next to you or shares an office with you, that person who works for the same organization but be in a different department. We have to be able to make sure that we have that system in our workplace. Because if we don't, we're not going to be the person we want to be. We're going to find that we flounder, that it's harder to manage stress, that our resilience almost non-existent. But when we have that person, even if it is just one person in that workplace that we can go to in times of, I need some support, I need a shoulder to cry on, celebrate this win with me, help me brainstorm something. I need an alibi, whatever it might be. When we have those people and we know that we can count on them in our workplaces, again, that is a really impactful act of self-care because it's showing that we know who to go to when we're not feeling our best, when we're not, you know, practicing the self-care we need to be. As an example, in my prior job, I had a very strong support system. It was a group of 4 people. We're still very much friends to this day. But one of the people in our group really enjoyed baking. Like this person was always baking and bringing in treats for everybody. I do not know where they found the time to do all of this baking. But then as changes occurred in our workplace and stress set in and resilience was lowered, everyone was kind of feeling a little defeated, really confused. We noticed that she stopped baking. It started out as kind of a small thing where they were bringing in treats every other day. It suddenly only became once a week. And then in a passing conversation, she said, I haven't baked anything in like a month. And that was a clue to the rest of us to be like, are you okay? And just that random comment, because we knew that this thing was so important to her because this was her creative outlet and she wasn't engaging in it. It was a cue to us as her support system to be able to ask her, are you okay? What can we do to help you? What are you struggling with? And it was through our concern that she also realized that she was struggling with some things and really needed to reaffirm her self-care. So she went back to seeing her therapist. She started forcing herself to bake again to find the things that help provide that balance in her life. So I will always speak to the importance of self support systems of self care, especially in our workplaces. And if you're someone who doesn't know what that support system would look like for you, or you don't have one in your workplace, I will always suggest, if there are peer support groups or mentorship groups, if there's professional networking, you can usually find something through those things. But I will stop really harping on support system because it really is important. So I felt it was worth a mention twice, especially as we focus on our workplaces, because we do spend so much of our time there. So, how we can do this, we're going to identify our networks, we're going to communicate, we're going to engage in community activities, we're going to seek professional help when we need it. And then, of course, remembering that social support is reciprocal. If you go to someone, um, let them know that they can come to you. This is also a great place to practice those boundaries. So when someone comes up to you and says, I could really use a shoulder to cry on today, to be able to enforce the boundary, like, I want to be there for you. I want to be able to be that shoulder, but today I just don't have the ability to do that. But here's a resource you can use. It's a great way to practice boundaries. So let's talk about how we can stay consistent. Not a big shocker to anyone. As human beings, we tend to think in all or nothing, right? It's, I'm going to exercise every single day of the week. And when I miss Monday, I'll just wait till next Monday to start over. Or I am going to completely change my life, in the next 30 days. And then we miss a day and we kind of start, oh, well, guess I'll try again next month. We basically really enjoy setting ourselves up for failure. So when we're talking about re-engaging in self-care or starting a new self-care practice, let's start small and build up. So I'm going to start with, I'm going to connect with friends for coffee one time this month. That's what I feel I'm capable of right now. Maybe next month we'll include a coffee and a lunch, or I really want to take up a creative outlet that I really like. So I'm interested in dance classes. Maybe this week I'll go just watch an adult dance class and see what it's about. And then maybe next week I'll come in and trial the class. Start small. And if we're starting small and we miss something, we don't have to consider it a loss or a failure. It's just oops, I'll get right back on this. And if something's not working, go ahead and change it and try something else. But when we start small and we slowly increase what we're doing, we do find that we are better able to stick with the thing that we have set up for ourselves. We're better able to reach that goal that we are working toward. And like I've been saying throughout our time together so far, schedule a self-care activity like an appointment. If you have to write on your calendar 1 to 2 p.m., I'm taking a walk, set it as an appointment and go do it. Um, I know personally, and I know for a lot of other people, seeing something written down and in plain sight where we are is usually the thing that we need to get us up and actually doing it. Or if you have a pet and one of your self-care goals this week is to start taking and I have to be very careful because my pet is sitting next to me when I say this next thing, and you want to go take a stroll around your neighborhood. Dogs become really good at routine, and so they'll start picking up on the time that it's time to go take a stroll and remind you. So there's another way to self-schedule an appointment, right? We can also engage in things like pairing self-care with existing habits or habit stacking. I did actually do a presentation on this. It's pretty fascinating theory where what we do is we incorporate the new thing that we want to do into a routine that we already do. So if in the morning one of the things you do is set a pot of coffee to brew, can you do a 2-minute meditation during that coffee is brewing, or can you get some stretching in while that coffee is brewing? Once you've poured your cup of coffee and you sit down to scroll through your phone or whatever it is you do, can we replace that with, oh, I'm going to journal now, or I'm going to paint or write for 2 minutes, or I'm going to, you know, write out a song, play a song while I drink my coffee. So when we start engaging and putting that new habit especially around self-care with something that we already do, it doesn't take long for it to become an automatic response where that coffee starts brewing and we think, oh, I need to write now. Reminders and accountability partners. It's really great when you have that person who's like, so did you bake today? Or, hey, I'm going lunch to go I'm trying to think of something because I've used walk so many times. During lunch, I'm going to go participate in a yoga class. Do you want to go with me? Accountability partners are really, really amazing. And again, it goes back to that connection for or social connection. And then remember just to be flexible and just as needed. You don't have to be rigid in it. If something is not working for you, it's okay to stop and try something different. If, journaling 5 times a week isn't a good fit for you and you can only do it once a week, awesome. Stick with once a week. Use that time for reflection and find something else you can do in the time you would have normally used for that. Don't force yourself to do something, especially if you're considering it an act of self-care, because if you force yourself to do it, you're not going to enjoy it. You might even become resentful of it, and then you're just going to stop because it doesn't feel good. So make sure that you maintain that flexibility as needed. So as I had said, and we're actually doing pretty good on time, is talking about creating a personalized self-care plan. I have some examples in here of self-care plans that I did put together. But what this is something that you can sit down when you have the time, when you're ready to think about and start creating what a self-care plan would look like for you. We begin by assessing what we're currently practicing. So, when I wrote this, I don't remember the exact sample I used, but I'm making sure that I'm reading 15 minutes a day, but I'd like to, I'm really neglecting this area. So we acknowledge what we're already doing and what we're good with. We identify the area where we need more attention. For me, I should probably get up and move a lot more. We're going to then set a realistic and achievable goal. And whenever possible, we can try to incorporate a mix of practices. So, physically, I know that going out and getting some movement is going to be great for my emotional health because it's allowing me to separate. I might include my husband or a friend, a neighbor, the pet with me. So we have some socialization there. Maybe this is your time when you're out and enjoying your movement to engage in a self-spiritual or a religious or cultural activity. Maybe this is your chance to be creative. You like to take pictures. Awesome. You can work it in there. So this is what an example could look like for a personalized self-care plan. You can always give yourself a name, Put a date on it so you know when you started it. Identify the area that you're going to improve, physical self-care, and let's give it a goal. When we give ourselves a goal, we are actually more likely to continue working on it instead of that nebulous, oh, I'm going to get more exercise. Really vague, doesn't really stick with us. But when we say, my goal is that I want to improve my physical health and energy levels, well, we're giving ourselves two things that we can identify, right? And then we can actually name how we're going to do this. Well, for my activities, I'm going to take this 30-minute stroll around my neighborhood. I'm going to try to incorporate more vegetables and proteins into my eating. I'm going to do my best to get that 7 to 8 hours of sleep, and I'm going to try to drink at least 8 glasses of water daily. And what I'm doing by putting this out there is that I'm giving myself actionable strategies that I can do. And at first, it's going to feel very routine, like you're forcing it. But if it's something that's working for you, eventually you're not even going to have to think about this. It's just going to become automatic to you. And again, it gives me measurable things. I can look back at that and say, "Ooh, I ate Doritos with every meal this week instead of focusing a bit more on vegetables. Oops." Or hey, I've noticed that because I'm sleeping 8 hours a night, I'm better functioning in the morning when I get to work. So we actually give ourselves goals that we can measure and keep track of. Sorry, my slide didn't want to move there. So when I looked at one and I thought, okay, how can we continue doing this? Well, maybe my emotional self-care is a little off. So how am I going to overcome that? What is my goal? Well, I want to enhance my emotional well-being and reduce stress. And again, write it out. Here's what I can do. Here's when I can do it. Write down the things that I'm grateful for. So they all just give us examples of what we can be doing to create those, personalized self-care plans. It's especially helpful if you're someone who likes to see things written down. If you're someone who is very task oriented, you can see that this is my commitment. This is what I'm doing. Here's my way to track it, to adjust. It can be really, really helpful. So I have talked a lot. I want to start bringing us to a point where we can have time for discussion. So just to really kind of bring everything together, there's a few things that as we leave today, what I'd like us all to remember is that we need to prioritize self-care. It's not selfish, it is needed because when you are putting yourself as a priority, you are setting yourself up to be, the person other people would like you to be. If you have to, create a plan for it. Remember that support is vitally important to this because we can't do everything alone and that connection matters. It is not selfish at all. You can't pour from that empty cup. You can't breathe. If you're on a flight and they say, the airbags come down or the air masks drop down, put yours on first before anyone else. They do that because they know that if you're trying to help someone else put on their mask and you can't breathe, you're going to pass out before you can help that other person. And then we have two people who are struggling. So, not selfish. It is vital to our well being and that we start small because when we go too big and we plan too much and we are very rigid and say we're going to do this thing and I'm going to have it accomplished in 30 days, we are unintentionally setting ourselves up for failure. So start small, make adjustments as needed, find the things that work for you, and really focus if you can on just that one area that you're going to try improving on, whether it's social, emotional, physical, spiritual, cultural, religious, whatever that might be. Just focus on that one area for now. Don't try to bring in everything else. So, again, thank you for having me here this week. I've appreciated the ability to come talk to you about so many different things. I love that we're ending on self-care, but now is a great time for questions, comments. Again, I will make sure that Jessica receives the copy of this PDF so that it can be shared out with you. But other than that, again, thank you for having me here today.
Thanks so much, Carly. I really appreciate this. I learned a lot. I've now categorized certain things in the self-care category that I didn't before. So thanks so much for helping me see it that way. I want to see if there's any questions from any of our folks that joined us today.
We
And I'm
do. We do have one in the chat. It's what suggestions do we have for gradually incorporating self-care practices and or determining which ones aren't working and knowing when to pivot away from them. Because this person, Amy, shared that they're the kind of person who wants to try all the things at once. I can relate to that. I hear about a new thing, I'm like, I'm going to try that. I'm going to keep trying that. So, coming from that perspective as well, my advice and the things that I have found that works for me is that I write down all of the things, right? I acknowledge all the things that I want to do at once, and I only allow myself to pick one. And then, try it out for a week. So if you've got 7 things, you're like, I want to try all these things, just pick the one that you feel is the one you can incorporate right now. Try it for 7 days. At the end of 7 days, reflect on it. Was it easy for you to work into your routine? How did you feel when you engaged in this activity? Did you find that you had to push yourself to do it? Did you get anything from it? Ask yourself these self-reflective questions. And if your answers are, well, no, I found it a struggle to put this into my routine, or oh, by the middle of the week, I just realized this isn't for me. We start to be able to answer those questions and know that, okay, this isn't working for me, and I can put it to the side and try something else. And when we put it to the side, it might just be that it's not working for us right now, but that 6 months from now, we could always try it again and see if it works then. So that's what I tend to do is focus on the one thing that excites me the most, try it out for a set period of time, and then reflect on whether or not I found value in it. And if I didn't, it's time to try something else. So, but if other people have suggestions, please absolutely share those. We all learn from each other. So, Amy, I hope that kind of helped give you an idea.